Good evening. Tonight, we turn to Moscow, to a night that even the Kremlin's loudest propagandists will struggle to bury under slogans. A night that redefined what it means to feel safe in the heart of an empire. It did not start with tanks rolling over a border or with a presidential decree wrapped in pomp and banners. It began quietly, deceptively, with the humming of engines so small they would have gone unnoticed on any normal evening. But this was not a normal evening. Sometime after 11 p.m., the sky above Moscow filled with movement. Tiny points of light caught by security cameras, the kind that residents used to watch for traffic accidents, not battlefields. Within minutes, the city that calls itself untouchable learned that the air around it could, in fact, burn. The Kremlin's story for almost 3 years has been simple: the war is far away. The nation's shield is impregnable, Moscow is sacred, insulated, and serene. Russians could go about their lives, grumble about sanctions, sip imported coffee substitutes, and trust that the front lines were distant geography. That illusion collapsed between sunset and sunrise. Witnesses described the first blast as a pulse, one deep thud that made windows flex. Then came another. Car alarms screamed, apartment lights flicked on, and suddenly the sky above the capital looked like a battlefield made of neon. Civilians filmed glowing streaks curving through the night air, defense missiles arching upward, chasing what appeared to be fireflies. Those fireflies were drones, hundreds of them, approaching from multiple directions at varying altitudes. For years, Russian officials had boasted of a multi-layered defense network so advanced that no adversary could possibly breach it. Each layer, Panzer, Tor, Buk, S-400, was supposed to dovetail into a perfect technological dome. But domes, it turns out, look perfect only in diagrams. When the first wave hit radar screens, operators hesitated to believe what they saw. Drones that small shouldn't show up in such numbers. Was it a glitch? Birds. A software malfunction. The hesitation cost them minutes, and minutes, in this kind of warfare, are forever. By midnight, Moscow's defenses were responding like a man juggling too many knives. Intercepts launched wildly, each missile costing more than any drone it destroyed. Ammunition stocks depleted faster than commanders anticipated. Smoke trails began to lace the low clouds. The belief that Moscow's shield was flawless evaporated in real time. Paris has its boulevards, New York its grid. Moscow has its arteries of denial, broad avenues built as monuments to power. On this night, those avenues echoed with sirens. Police vehicles screamed toward unknown points. Loudspeakers urged people away from windows, but most simply stood at balconies, filming in disbelief. Inside airports, chaos grew quiet and then louder again. Sheremetyevo, Domodedovo, Vnukovo, the gateways to the world, froze simultaneously. Flight boards flashed crimson. Pilots waiting for clearances were ordered to taxi back, others circled aimlessly, low on fuel. One jet carrying a senior official from an allied nation made 3 failed approaches before diverting to Minsk. An entire diplomatic protocol, permission, honor escort, limousine on the tarmac, collapsed into embarrassment. By dawn, hundreds of flights were canceled or stranded. Terminals filled with travelers clutching their phones as news updates contradicted one another, television said. Everything intercepted, all calm. While social media showed fireballs and tracer streaks over the suburbs. Trust, the soft currency of authoritarian stability, plummeted faster than the ruble. Authoritarian systems don't merely depend on censorship, they depend on coherence. The story told from the top must match what is seen from the window. For generations, the Kremlin maintained that perfect overlapped official narrative mirrored the visual calm of the capital. That symmetry shattered. Now, when the announcement says, situation under control, and the sky glows crimson above your apartment complex, which do you believe? The words or the light? In that split second of disbelief, power leaks out like air from a punctured tire. Russia's defense philosophy was tailored for duels against expensive threats. NATO bombers, cruise missiles, high-speed intrusions. Its radars were never trained to pick out hundreds of low-altitude, garage-built craft guided by GPS and stubborn ingenuity. A single Panzer battery can handle at most 24 incoming objects before either overheating or exhausting ammunition. Multiply that failure across the defensive ring of the capital, and you get a perfect storm of confusion. Each interceptor missile costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Each drone, assembled with off-the-shelf motors and repurposed camera chips, costs a few thousand at most. The mathematics itself becomes its own weapon. The poorer side dictates how much the wealthier must bleed to stay safe. That equation marked December 10 as the night economic warfare and psychological warfare fused into one reality. Beneath the ground, Moscow's legendary metro system whispered its own story. Those stations, built under Stalin, do more than display chandeliers and mosaics. They double as subterranean fortresses sealed behind steel doors. As alarms sounded above, commuters rushed downward not because they sought transport, but because instinct told them what those tunnels once promised: shelter. The irony was too bitter to ignore. For decades, officials mocked the notion that Moscow might again need its Cold War bunkers. Yet, here were ordinary citizens taking cover amid marble pillars designed as wartime redoubts. On social media, grainy footage showed families huddled near escalators while train announcements droned about technical delays. Some joked nervously about moving into the metro permanently. None laughed loudly enough to believe their own humor. There's a reason rumors about Government Line D6, the secret high-speed tunnel network connecting critical ministries and estates, never quite vanish. In anxious moments, people imagine their leaders vanishing through those tunnels while civilians rely on luck and thin walls. The separation between governing class and governed becomes literal geography. On this night, that geography felt real. Limousines raced through central Moscow under military escort while air defenses fired above. Whatever solidarity wartime propaganda had manufactured began to decay. When your leaders have bunkers and you have a blanket, faith in unity dissolves. At 2 a.m., state channels switched to technical programming interruptions. The silence was louder than bombs. Independent bloggers filled the void with Lev feeds, coordinates, speculations. The result wasn't chaos, it was awakening. Russians who spent months filtering the conflict through sanitized updates suddenly became eyewitnesses. Disinformation collapses in the face of personal experience. Once a citizen has filmed explosions over their own neighborhood, no amount of studio lighting can reorder the truth. As dawn approached, the Kremlin sought to reassert composure. Spokesmen emphasized interception rates, always 90% or higher, always enough to sound victorious. Yet the visible damage contradicted the rehearsal. Airport hangars scorched, suburban electrical substations crippled, neighborhoods without power. Markets opened to panic. Insurance companies froze aviation coverage pending assessments. Global carriers quietly suspended routes. By midday, Moscow felt semi-detached from the outside world. A metropolis suddenly provincial, its skyline beautiful but humiliated. The mood on the streets mixed irritation and awe. Taxi drivers cursed traffic snarls worsened by checkpoints. Office workers traded rumors instead of rubles. The normal monotony of the capital had been replaced by a shared, uneasy adrenaline, the recognition that the world's narratives had folded into their own airspace. Inside the Kremlin compound, according to sources familiar with internal deliberations, meetings ran without pause. Not because strategies flourished, but because, for once, everyone realized there were none. The generals could explain each failure technically. Overloaded radar, outdated circuit boards. But none could explain why the adversary kept out, thinking a system 40 times larger. President Putin's power rests less on ballots and more on the perception of control. When rockets explode above the very palaces representing that control, the physics of fear reverses. Leaders start fearing their population. For most Russians, daily life had continued through the war's earlier phases as though history were a television show with a bad signal. Soldiers fought, the capital consumed. December 10 erased the buffer. Parents hushed children by saying it was just thunder, but those children have internet access. They watched drone debris photographed on their own streets. No illusion of distance can survive that. Psychologists studying authoritarian societies note a subtle phenomenon called the moment of discontinuity. It's when the official narrative and lived experience diverge irreconcilably. Citizens may not revolt immediately, they simply stop believing. Systems crack inward from that silent disbelief. By that measure, Moscow crossed a psychological border more consequential than any trench line. Foreign observers reacted with astonishment. Diplomats advised staff families to leave, airlines rerouted overnight. Satellite imagery confirmed what officials would not multiple impact sites within a 30-mile radius of the Kremlin itself. In European capitals, defense analysts rushed to brief lawmakers. The question was no longer about the weaponry. It was about precedent. If the crown city of a nuclear power could be exposed by swarms of cheap drones, then the global balance of deterrence had shifted. The era of expensive dominance had met the age of inexpensive defiance. There's a phrase from Soviet folklore. Moscow does not believe in tears. On this night, Moscow did not believe in its shield. 80 years ago, citizens of that same city sheltered from Nazi bombers. They took pride in surviving the unspeakable. The victory that followed became a moral currency spent for generations. But national myths expire when reality produces new evidence. Drone swarms, unlike bombers, carry no pilots, no overt malice. They are cold algorithms forcing human systems to reveal their inefficiencies. In that sense, Moscow on December 10 wasn't attacked by machines. It was confronted by math, by the unavoidable proof that arrogance cannot compute adaptability. Interviews with witnesses days later revealed details too mundane and too telling to appear in official accounts. A baggage handler at Sheremetyevo described blue uniformed security staff forming human chains to move stranded families away from windows. A teacher from Odinsovo recalled counting flashes between seconds on her watch, timing them like lightning, whispering to stay calm for her son's sake. An IT worker posted that every boom felt like punctuation in a text she could not yet decipher. Her post ended with one line, maybe now we know how Kiev sounds at night. That empathy, that glimpse across the front lines, was precisely what the architects of disinformation had feared most. Let's talk about proportion. Each intercepted drone obliges the defender to expend a missile whose cost may equal the yearly wage of 10 teachers. In one night, economic strain reached tens of millions of dollars, defending the illusion, not the city. Strategists call this symmetric attrition. In simpler terms, when the weaker side dictates the price of the stronger side's survival, the meaning of power changes. This, then, was the real Battle of Moscow, not between nations, but between equations. When daylight finally scattered the haze, Muscovites confronted a transformed skyline. Plumes still curled from the outskirts. Security forces swept streets for scraps of fuselage. Billboards still replayed patriotic slogans. Life resumed, but not as before. Cafes reopened. Radio hosts chattered about resilience, yet conversation among ordinary citizens. On trams, in online forums, took a new tone, wary irony. They repeated the government's lines with laughter that sounded too loud. Repression can contain anger, it cannot contain irony. Once people laugh knowingly at propaganda, the spell is broken. By evening, official briefings announced all threats neutralized. New footage, however, emerged showing drones striking fuel depots beyond Moscow's ring road. Denial piled upon denial like sandbags against a flood that kept rising. You could see fatigue in the propagandists' eyes. They have mastered outrage, but they cannot perform uncertainty. And uncertainty is what the drones delivered in bulk. For generals trained on parade ground bravado, uncertainty is lethal. Each radar echo now raises the question, is it another swarm? Or just crows gliding over the suburbs? By forcing them to ask, the attackers succeed even without exploding a single warhead. Fear once lived at the edges of Russia's map, near borders and trenches. Now it snakes through Wi-Fi networks, apartment blocks, commuter lines. It is no longer a rumor from television, it's the vibration in glass panes at midnight. Every siren wail carries double resonance, physical alarm, and metaphysical doubt. If the state cannot protect its capital, what exactly is the state protecting? That is the question December 10 carved into Moscow's psyche more deeply than any crater. In myth, empires fall to outside invaders. In modern reality, they crumble when their own storytelling burns out. The Kremlin's most valuable asset has never been oil or missiles, it has been belief. The conviction that authority equals safety. That belief caught fire above Moscow's skyline and fell as ash on car rooftops. No censorship campaign can sweep that residue away. Officials revived talk of expanding civil defense networks, new shelters, evacuation drills, updated bunkers. Yet even that pragmatic planning contains subtext. If you need new shelters, you are conceding that the old promise of security has expired. Down in the metro, posters now feature dual messages, transport schedules on one line, emergency protocols on the next. The overlap is surreal, daily life and existential defense occupying the same square of printed paper. To outside observers, this may look like just another data point in a grinding conflict. But to millions living under that red-tinged sky, the night of 300 drones was existential revelation. It said modern war cannot be geographically contained, and myth cannot shield physics. For Ukrainians enduring bombardment, this reversal carried grim validation. Proof that distance is no moral insulation. For Russians, it opened a terrifying mirror. One night's storm made visible what censorship long concealed, that every empire built on denial eventually watches its own sky fall in. Tonight, as we review those events, it's tempting to focus on the numbers. Intercepts logged, systems tested, damage assessed. But statistics can't quantify what broke that night. A mental firewall protecting millions from the idea that their countries could ever falter. You can rebuild hangars. You can replace radar arrays. Rebuilding belief, that is another science entirely. And so, Moscow awakens to a paradox. It remains magnificent. Its river glowing under winter lights, its towers polished as monuments to control. Yet behind those towers, every citizen carries a new understanding whispered quietly, and sometimes fearfully. The line between home front and war front no longer exists. What the war is not elsewhere. The war is above you, around you, within the stories your government tells. That is where denial ends and awareness begins. And on December 10, awareness came not as a broadcast, not as a statement, but as a swarm. Good night.